Thomas McKenna wiped the sweat from his forehead as he looked at the dark clouds gathering in the distance. The 26-year-old rancher had been driving his cattle across the rough Texas landscape for 3 days now. His father had sent him to collect stray cattle from the far edges of their property. It was hard work, but Thomas was used to it. The clouds looked angry and black. They were moving fast across the sky. Thomas had seen storms like this before. They could be dangerous. Lightning could strike without warning. The wind could knock a man off his horse. Rain could flood the low areas in minutes. Thomas pulled, his hat down tight on his head. His horse, a brown mare named Bella, seemed nervous. She kept moving her head and stepping sideways. Animals always knew when bad weather was coming. They could feel it in the air before humans could. "Easy, girl," Thomas said softly to his horse. He patted her neck. "We need to find shelter soon." The problem was that Thomas did not know this area well. His father's ranch was huge, but this part was new to him. He had never been this far from home before. The land looked different here. There were more rocks and hills. The grass was shorter and more yellow. Strange plants grew between the rocks. Thomas looked around for any sign of a building or cave. He needed to find cover before the storm hit, but all he could see were rolling hills covered with scrub brush and cactus. No trees big enough to hide under. No rocks big enough to crawl behind. The first drops of rain began to fall. They were big and heavy. Thomas knew this meant the storm would be bad. Light rain meant a gentle storm. Heavy drops meant trouble. Thunder rolled across the sky. It sounded like a giant was beating a drum. Bella jumped and whinnied. She was getting more scared. Thomas tried to stay calm, but he was worried too. Being caught in a storm in the open was one of the most dangerous things that could happen to a cowboy. The wind started to pick up. It whistled through the rocks and made strange sounds. The air felt heavy and thick. Thomas could smell the rain coming. It had a clean, sharp smell that always came before a big storm. Lightning flashed in the distance. Thomas counted the seconds before he heard the thunder. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The storm was still about a mile away, but it was moving fast. He had maybe 10 minutes before it reached him. Thomas kicked his heels into Bella's sides. "Come on, girl. We need to move." They rode hard across the rough ground. Thomas kept looking for any kind of shelter. A cave in the rocks. An old building. Even a group of big trees would help. But there was nothing. Just more empty land stretching out in all directions. The rain was falling harder now. Thomas pulled his coat tight around his shoulders. The drops were cold and stung his face. The wind was getting stronger too. It pushed against him and made it hard to stay balanced on his horse. Another flash of lightning lit up the sky. This time it was much closer. The thunder came right after it with a loud crack that made both Thomas and his horse jump. Bella reared up on her back legs. Thomas held tight to the reins and tried to calm her down. "Whoa, Bella. Easy now." But the horse was too scared. Another bolt of lightning struck somewhere nearby. The sound was like a gun going off right next, to Thomas's ear. Bella spun around and bucked. Thomas tried to hold on, but the horse was moving too wildly. He felt himself sliding off the saddle. His hands grabbed for the reins, but they slipped through his fingers. The world spun around him as he fell through the air. He hit the ground hard on his left shoulder and rolled several times before coming to a stop. Pain shot through his shoulder and down his arm. His head was spinning. He could taste dirt in his mouth. Thomas tried to sit up, but everything hurt. He looked around for Bella, but she was gone. The horse had run away, scared by the lightning. The rain was coming down hard, now. Thomas was already soaked through his clothes. He struggled to his feet, holding his injured shoulder. Without his horse, he was in serious trouble. He had no shelter and no way to travel fast. The storm was getting worse by the minute. Lightning flashed again, closer this time. Thomas could feel the electricity in the air. His hair stood up on his arms. He knew he needed to get away from the open ground. Lightning liked to hit the highest thing around, and right now, that was him. He started walking, looking for any kind of low ground or shelter. His shoulder throbbed with each step. His boots were heavy with mud. The wind pushed against him, making it hard to walk in a straight line. That's when he saw it. Far in the distance, through the rain and wind, he could see a thin line of smoke, rising into the air. Someone had a fire going. Where there was fire, there were people. Where there were people, there might be shelter. Thomas did not care who it was. He had been taught to be careful around strangers, especially in this part of the country. His father had always warned him about Apache Indians who lived in these lands. "They don't like white folks," his father would say. "Stay away from them." But right now, Thomas did not care about any of that. He was hurt, lost, and caught in a dangerous storm. He needed help, and that smoke was the only sign of people he could see. He started walking toward the smoke. Each step was hard. His shoulder felt like it was on fire. The rain made it difficult to see where he was going. Several times he stumbled on rocks or holes in the ground. The lightning was getting worse. It seemed to flash every few seconds now. The thunder was so loud it hurt his ears. Thomas had never been in a storm this bad before. He was truly afraid. As he got closer to the smoke, he could see that it was coming from somewhere down in a hidden canyon. He would have to climb down to reach it. With his hurt shoulder, that would not be easy. But he had no choice. Thomas reached the edge of the canyon and looked down. Through the rain, he could see a small fire and what looked like a shelter built into the rocks. His heart jumped with hope. He was going to make it. But as he started to climb down the steep rocks, Thomas had no idea that his life was about to change forever. He did not know that the people by that fire would teach him things. His father never told him. He did not know that everything he believed about right and wrong about his own people and others was about to be turned upside down. All Thomas knew was that he needed to get out of the storm. He had no idea that he was about to discover something much more important than shelter. He was about to discover who he really was. Thomas slipped and slid down the rocky canyon wall. His hurt shoulder made it hard to hold on to the rocks. Several times he almost fell. The rain made everything slippery and dangerous, but he kept going because he could see the warm glow of the fire below. When he finally reached the bottom, Thomas was breathing hard. His clothes were soaked and muddy. Blood ran from cuts on his hands where the rocks had scraped them. He stood in the rain for a moment, looking at the shelter ahead of him. It was not like any building he had ever seen. The walls seemed to be made of earth and stones fitted together. The roof was flat and covered with more earth. Smoke came from a hole in the top. It looked like it had grown right out of the canyon wall. Thomas walked closer, his boots making soft sounds in the wet sand. He could smell something cooking. His stomach growled. He had not eaten since morning, and it was getting dark now. As he got near the door, which was just an opening covered with animal skins, Thomas stopped. What if the people inside did not want to help him? What if they were dangerous? His father's warnings echoed in his head. But before he could decide what to do, the skins moved aside. A woman stepped out. Thomas had never seen anyone like her. She was tall and strong-looking, with long black hair that hung down her back. Her skin was brown from the sun. She wore clothes made of soft leather that was decorated with beads and colored thread. Her dark eyes looked at him carefully, but not with fear. Behind her, another woman appeared. She was younger, maybe 20 years old. She had the same dark hair and eyes, but her face was softer, more curious. Thomas could see that they were sisters. The older woman said something in a language Thomas did not understand. Her voice was low and musical. The younger sister answered in the same language. They were talking about him. He knew that much. Thomas stood there dripping wet, not knowing what to say. He had never talked to Apache people before. His father had told him they were violent and could not be trusted, but these women did not look dangerous. They looked more concerned than angry. Finally, the older woman spoke in English. Her words were clear, but had an accent Thomas had never heard before. "You are hurt," she said. It was not a question. She could see the way he held his shoulder. "Yes, ma'am," Thomas said. He tried to stand up straighter, but his shoulder would not let him. My horse threw me in the storm. I saw your smoke and I was hoping. He did not know how to finish. Was he hoping for help? Yes. Was he hoping they would not hurt him? Yes. Was he hoping they would let him stay until the storm passed? Yes. The younger sister said something to the older one in their language. The older woman looked at Thomas for a long moment. Lightning flashed above the canyon, and thunder rolled across the sky. The rain was coming down even harder now. I am Ayana, the older woman said. This is my sister Ciala. You cannot stay in the storm. Come inside. Thomas could not believe it. They were going to help him. After everything his father had told him about Apache people, these women were going to help a stranger. Thank you, he said. Thank you so much. I'm Thomas McKenna. Ayana nodded and stepped aside so he could enter. Thomas had to duck to get through the low doorway. When he stood up inside, he was amazed by what he saw. The room was warm and comfortable. A fire burned in the center, with smoke going up through the hole in the roof. The walls were smooth and painted with beautiful designs in red and yellow, and blue. Woven blankets covered the floor. Clay pots sat in neat rows along one wall. It was nothing like what Thomas had expected. His father had always described Apache homes as dirty and primitive. But this place was clean and well organized. It felt more like a real home than the rough cabin where Thomas lived with his father. Ciala brought him a thick blanket made of soft wool. She said something to him in English, but her words were harder to understand than her sister's. She says, "You must get out of the wet clothes," Ayana explained. "You will get sick if you stay in them. We will give you dry things to wear." Thomas felt his face get hot. He was not used to women talking about his clothes. His father had raised him to be very careful around women. But he was so cold and wet that he did not argue. The sisters turned their backs while Thomas changed into dry clothes they gave him. The shirt and pants were made of the same soft leather as their clothes. They fit him well enough, though they felt strange against his skin. When he was dressed, Ayana looked at his shoulder. She touched it gently with her fingers, feeling the bones underneath. Thomas tried not to cry out, but it hurt. "It is not broken," she said. "But it is badly hurt. I can help with the pain." She went to the clay pots along the wall and began mixing things together. Thomas watched as she took dried plants from some pots and ground them up with a stone. She added water and stirred it all together. "Drink this," she said, handing him a small cup. Thomas looked at the dark liquid. It smelled like nothing he had ever smelled before. Sweet, but also bitter. He thought about his father's warnings again. What if it was poison? But Ayana had kind eyes. And if these women wanted to hurt him, they could have left him outside in the storm. Thomas drank the medicine. It tasted awful, but almost right away, the pain in his shoulder began to feel better. Ciala brought him a bowl of food. It was some kind of stew with meat and vegetables. Thomas did not recognize all the flavors, but it was the best food he had tasted in a long time. At home, he and his father ate mostly beans and bread and whatever meat they could catch. As he ate, the sisters talked quietly to each other in their own language. Sometimes they looked at him, but not in a way that made him uncomfortable. They seemed to be discussing what to do with him. Outside, the storm was getting worse. Wind howled through the canyon. Rain pounded on the roof above them. Lightning flashed so often that Thomas could see it through the smoke hole. He was very glad to be inside. "The storm will last all night," Ayana said. "You cannot travel in this weather. You will stay here until morning." Thomas nodded gratefully. "I don't know how to thank you. If there's anything I can do to help, you can tell us about yourself," Ciala said. Her English was getting better as she talked more. "We do not often see white men in this place. Why are you here?" Thomas told them about his father's ranch and how he had been looking for stray cattle. He told them about getting lost and about Bella running away when the lightning scared her. As he talked, he realized that the sisters were really listening to him. They asked good questions and seemed interested in his answers. This surprised Thomas. He had been taught that Apache people were simple and could not understand complicated things. But Ayana and Ciala were clearly very smart. They understood everything he said, and their questions showed they were thinking carefully about what he told them. As the night went on, Thomas began to relax. The medicine Ayanna had given him made his shoulder feel much better. The warm food filled his stomach. The fire kept him warm and dry. But most of all, the kindness of these two women made him feel safe. He started to wonder if his father had been wrong about Apache people. These sisters were nothing like what he had been told to expect. They were generous and intelligent and kind. They had saved his life, and they did not even know him. As he settled down to sleep on the soft blankets they gave him, Thomas thought about everything that had happened. This morning, he had been just another cowboy looking for lost cattle. Tonight he was sleeping in an Apache home, cared for by people his father said were his enemies. But they did not feel like enemies. They felt like the first real friends he had ever had. And that thought both excited and scared him more than the storm raging outside. Thomas woke up slowly. For a moment he did not remember where he was. The ceiling above him looked strange. It was made of wooden beams covered with earth, not the rough boards of his father's cabin. Then he remembered the storm, his fall, and the two Apache sisters who had saved him. Sunlight was coming through the smoke hole in the roof. The storm had passed during the night. Thomas could hear birds singing outside, and the air smelled fresh and clean. His shoulder still hurt, but not as much as yesterday. Whatever medicine Ayanna had given him was working. Thomas sat up carefully and looked around the room. Ayanna was already awake, working near the fire. She was grinding something in a stone bowl, making a soft scraping sound. When she saw that, Thomas was awake. She smiled. "Good morning," she said. "How do you feel?" "Much better, thank you," Thomas said. He moved his shoulder a little. It was stiff, but the sharp pain was mostly gone. "That medicine you gave me really helped." "My grandmother taught me to make it," Ayanna said. "She learned from her grandmother, and she learned from hers. The knowledge goes back many generations." Thomas was impressed. His own family did not have much knowledge about healing. When someone got hurt or sick, they usually just hoped it would get better on its own. Sometimes they went to the doctor in town, but that was expensive and far away. Ciala came in from outside carrying a bundle of plants. She had been up early gathering things from the canyon. When she saw Thomas was awake, she said something to her sister in their language. "Ciala found fresh plants for your shoulder," Ayanna explained. "The rain last night made them grow strong. She wants to make a new medicine for you." "You don't have to do that," Thomas said. "You've already done so much." "A person who is hurt should be healed," Ayanna said simply. "This is our way." Thomas watched as the sisters worked together to prepare the new medicine. They moved with practiced ease, each knowing what the other needed without having to ask. Ciala cleaned the plants, while Ayanna heated water over the fire. They talked quietly in their own language as they worked. Thomas had never seen his father work so carefully with anything. On the ranch, everything was done fast and rough. Get the job done and move on to the next one. But these women took time to do things right. They paid attention to small details. When the medicine was ready, Ayanna brought it to Thomas. This one was not for drinking. Instead, she had made a paste that she wanted to put on his shoulder. "This will help the muscles heal," she said. "But I need to touch your shoulder to put it on, is that all right?" Thomas nodded. He was not used to being touched by anyone, especially not by a woman. His father had taught him that men should be tough and not need help from others. But Thomas's shoulder really did hurt, and these women seemed to know what they were doing. Ayanna's hands were gentle but strong. She rubbed the medicine into his shoulder with careful circular motions. The paste felt cool and soothing on his skin. Thomas could smell herbs and other plants he did not recognize. As she worked, Ayanna talked about the different plants she was using. Some grew only in certain parts of the canyon. Others only appeared after heavy rains. She knew where to find each one and when it was best to gather them. "How do you know so much about plants?" Thomas asked. "I am a healer," Ayanna said. "It is my gift and my responsibility. My people depend on me to help them when they are sick or hurt. I have studied with the elders since I was a young girl." Thomas thought about this. In his world, only men were supposed to have important jobs. Women were expected to cook and clean and take care of children. But Ayanna had real knowledge and skill. People trusted her with their lives. When she finished with the medicine, Ayanna wrapped Thomas's shoulder with soft cloth. The wrapping held the medicine against his skin and supported the injured muscles. "You should rest today," she said. "Let the healing begin before you try to travel." "I need to find my horse," Thomas said. "And I should get back to my father's ranch. He'll be worried about me." "Your horse came back during the night," Ciala said. "She is outside, eating grass. The storm scared her, but she is not hurt." Thomas was relieved. He had been worried about Bella. She was a good horse, and he would have felt terrible if something had happened to her because of his carelessness. "But you should still rest," Ayanna said. "Your shoulder needs time to heal. One more day will not hurt." Thomas wanted to argue, but he realized he was not really in a hurry to leave. These women had been kinder to him than anyone had ever been, and he was curious about their way of life. Everything here was so different from what he was used to. As the day went on, Thomas learned more about Ayanna and Ciala. They told him about their family and their people. Their father was an important man in the tribe, a leader who helped make decisions for everyone. Their mother had died when Ciala was young, and Ayanna had helped raise her sister. "Why do you live here alone?" Thomas asked. "Away from the rest of your people?" "This is a sacred place," Ayanna explained. "The spirits of our ancestors are strong here. I come here to gather special plants and to talk with the spirits when I need guidance for healing." Thomas did not understand what she meant about spirits, but he could feel that this place was special. There was a peace here that he had never felt anywhere else. The canyon walls seemed to protect them from the outside world. Ciala was more curious about Thomas's life. She asked him many questions about the ranch and about white people's customs. Some of her questions made Thomas think about things he had never really considered before. "Why do white men want to own so much land?" she asked. "More than they can use?" Thomas had always thought owning land was just what people did. His father owned their ranch, and he planned to own it someday too. But when Ciala asked the question, he realized he did not have a good answer. "I guess we want to make sure we have enough," he said. "Enough for what?" Ciala asked. Thomas thought about it. His father's ranch was bigger than they needed for their cattle. Most of it just sat empty. They did not use it for anything, but his father would never sell it or let anyone else use it. "I'm not sure," Thomas admitted. This was the first time in his life that Thomas had really thought about why his people did the things they did. He had always just accepted that the way his father lived was the right way. But talking with Ciala made him wonder if there might be other ways to think about things. In the afternoon, Ayanna showed Thomas some of the plants growing in the canyon. She pointed out which ones were good for medicine and which ones were good for food. Some could be used for both, depending on how they were prepared. Thomas was amazed by how much she knew. She could look at a plant and tell him exactly what it was good for, when to harvest it, and how to use it. This was knowledge that could save lives, and she carried it all in her memory. "Do you write any of this down?" Thomas asked. "We do not need to write it," Ayanna said. "We remember. Knowledge that is important to life, we keep in our hearts and minds. That way it cannot be lost or destroyed." Thomas thought about the few books in his father's cabin. Most of them were about ranching or religion. None of them contained the kind of practical knowledge that Ayanna had. Her education seemed much more useful than his own. As evening approached, Thomas realized that his whole understanding of Apache people had been wrong. His father had taught him that they were ignorant and savage. But Ayanna and Ciala were intelligent, educated, and civilized. They just had a different way of living and learning. That night, as they sat around the fire, after dinner, Ciala brought out a wooden flute. She began to play a beautiful, haunting melody that echoed off the canyon walls. The music was unlike anything Thomas had ever heard. It seemed to tell a story without words. "That was beautiful," Thomas said when she finished. "It is a song about the rain," Ciala explained. "How it brings life to the desert. how it washes away the old and makes room for the new. Thomas thought about the storm that had brought him here. It had washed away his old ideas about Apache people and made room for new understanding. Maybe that was what the song was really about, how unexpected things could change your life. As he settled down to sleep for his second night in the canyon, Thomas felt different than he had ever felt before. These 2 days had opened his eyes to a whole new way of seeing the world, and he was beginning to realize that there was much more to learn. Thomas woke on his third morning in the canyon feeling stronger than he had in years. His shoulder was much better, and his mind felt clearer somehow. The medicine and rest had healed more than just his physical injuries. When he stepped outside, he found Ciala sitting on a flat rock, watching the sunrise paint the canyon walls gold and red. She looked up at him with a smile. "You look better today," she said. "I feel better," Thomas said, sitting down beside her. "Your sister is a wonderful healer." "She is gifted," Ciala agreed. "But healing is not just about medicine. Sometimes people need to heal their thoughts and feelings too. Ayana is good at that kind of healing as well." Thomas knew what she meant. Something inside him had been healing during these past days. Old fears and prejudices that he had carried his whole life were starting to fade away. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas said. "Of course. What do you think about white people? I mean, before you met me, what did you think about us?" Ciala was quiet for a moment, watching a hawk circle high above the canyon. "We knew that white men had taken much of our land," she said finally. "We knew that they often broke their promises. We knew that many of them saw us as enemies, even when we tried to live in peace." Thomas felt ashamed. Everything she said was true. His own father had taught him to think of Apache people as dangerous enemies who could not be trusted. "But," Ciala continued, "my grandmother always told me that people are not all the same. She said that inside every person, there is both light and darkness. The important thing is which one they choose to follow." "What light do you see in me?" Thomas asked. Ciala turned to look at him directly. Her dark eyes seemed to see right into his soul. "I see someone who is willing to learn," she said. "Someone who can change his mind when he discovers he was wrong. That is a rare gift, even among my own people." During breakfast, Ayana announced that she wanted to show Thomas something special. She led him to a part of the canyon he had not seen before, where ancient drawings covered the rock walls. "My ancestors made these," she said, pointing to the colorful figures painted on the stone. "They tell the story of our people, how we came to this land, how we learned to live with the animals and plants, how we survived difficult times." Thomas stared at the paintings in wonder. Some showed hunters chasing deer and buffalo. Others showed people gathering plants or performing ceremonies. The figures were simple but full of life and movement. "How old are these?" Thomas asked. "Very old," Ayana said. "Older than anyone can remember, but the stories they tell are still alive. We still tell these stories to our children." Thomas thought about his own family's history. He knew almost nothing about his grandparents or great-grandparents. His father rarely talked about the past, but these Apache people had preserved their history for hundreds of years. "This one is my favorite," Ciala said, pointing to a painting that showed people dancing around a fire under a starry sky. "It shows how music and dance connect us to the spirits and to each other." "Do you still do ceremonies like this?" Thomas asked. "Yes," Ayana said. "When there is something important to celebrate or when we need guidance from the spirits." That afternoon, the sisters took Thomas to a high place in the canyon where they could see for miles across the desert. They pointed out different landmarks and told him the Apache names for various mountains and rivers. "Our people have lived in this area for many generations," Ayana explained. "We know every spring, every good hunting ground, every safe path through the mountains. This land is part of who we are." Thomas looked out across the vast landscape. To him, it had always been just empty space between towns. But the sisters saw it as a living homeland full of history and meaning. "Your father's ranch is in that direction," Ciala said, pointing toward the east. "What will you tell him about us when you return?" Thomas had been dreading this question. How could he explain what he had learned here? How could he tell his father that everything they had believed about Apache people was wrong? I don't know, he said honestly. He's not going to believe me. Then don't try to change his mind with words, Ayana said. Change it with your actions. Live differently. Treat people differently. Sometimes that speaks louder than words. That evening, as they shared another meal together, Thomas found himself talking more freely than he ever had in his life. He told the sisters about his lonely childhood, about his stern father who rarely showed affection, about the strict religious teachings that had filled him with fear and guilt. You have been taught to see the world as full of danger and sin, Ayana observed. But look around you. Do you see danger here? Do you see sin? Thomas looked at the peaceful canyon, at the two women who had shown him such kindness, at the beauty that surrounded them. He had been taught that the world was a fallen place full of temptation and evil, but this place felt sacred and pure. No, he said. I see something beautiful. Then trust what you see with your own eyes, Ciala said. Trust what you feel in your own heart. That is more important than what others have told you to believe. As darkness fell, Ciala brought out her flute again, but this time she also produced a small drum. She began to play a different kind of music, something that made Thomas want to move his body. This is dancing music, she explained. Would you like to learn? Thomas had never danced in his life. His father's religion taught that dancing was sinful, but sitting here in the firelight, with these kind women who had saved his life and opened his mind, those old rules seemed foolish. I don't know how, he said. There is no wrong way, Ayana said, standing up. Just move the way the music makes you feel. The sisters began to dance, their movements flowing and graceful. They moved like water, like wind, like flames from the fire. Their leather clothes and bead jewelry caught the firelight and sparkled. Thomas stood up awkwardly and tried to move to the rhythm. At first he felt silly and stiff, but the music was hypnotic, and gradually he began to relax. He stopped thinking about what he looked like and just let his body respond to the sounds. For the first time in his life, Thomas felt truly free. Free from his father's stern rules. Free from the fear and guilt that had always weighed him down. Free to be himself, whatever that might mean. As they danced together in the firelight, Thomas felt a connection to something larger than himself. It was not the angry, judging God his father had always preached about. It was something warm and accepting and full of life. When the music finally stopped, they all sat down, breathing hard and laughing. Thomas felt giddy with joy. He had never experienced anything like this before. How do you feel? Ayana asked. Alive, Thomas said. For the first time in my life, I feel truly alive. Ciala reached over and touched his hand gently. The simple contact sent a warm feeling through Thomas's whole body. He had been taught that such feelings were wrong, but they did not feel wrong. They felt natural and good. You have a beautiful spirit, she said. It was just hiding under all those rules and fears. Thomas looked into her eyes and saw acceptance and understanding. He saw something else too, a warmth that made his heart beat faster. He was beginning to understand that there were many kinds of love in the world, not just the stern duty his father had taught him about. As they settled down for the night, Thomas knew that he could not stay in this canyon forever, but he also knew that he could never go back to being the person he had been before. These women had awakened something in him that had been sleeping his whole life. Tomorrow he would have to decide what to do with this new understanding. But tonight, he was content to be exactly where he was, with people who accepted him for who he really was underneath all the fear and conditioning. For the first time since childhood, Thomas fell asleep without any worry or guilt. He dreamed of dancing under the stars, free and alive and full of joy. Thomas woke in the early hours before dawn, his heart racing from a dream he could not quite remember. The canyon was still dark, lit only by the glowing embers of the fire. He could hear the soft breathing of the sisters sleeping nearby. Something had changed inside him during the night. The dancing, the music, the feeling of freedom. It had awakened desires and emotions he had never allowed himself to feel before. His whole body felt alive with new energy. He sat up quietly, trying not to wake Ayana and Shiala, but Ayana was already stirring. She seemed to sense when people were troubled or restless. "You could not sleep?" she asked softly. "I slept, but—" Thomas struggled to find words. "I feel different, like something inside me has woken up." Ayana sat up and looked at him in the dim light. Her eyes were understanding and gentle. "Yesterday you found your spirit," she said. "When a spirit wakes up after being asleep for a long time, it can be overwhelming." "I don't know what to do with these feelings," Thomas said. "My father taught me they were wrong." "Your father taught you to fear your own nature," Ayana said. "But you are a grown man now. You can choose what to believe about yourself." Shiala had awakened too and was listening to their quiet conversation. She moved closer to them, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Thomas," she said softly, "what do you feel when you look at us?" The question was simple, but it struck right to the heart of what was troubling him. Thomas looked at these two beautiful, intelligent women who had saved his life and opened his mind. What did he feel? "I feel—" he started, then stopped. How could he explain it? "I feel grateful and amazed and—" He took a deep breath. "I feel drawn to you both in ways I've never felt before." "That is natural," Ayana said. "We feel the same way about you." Thomas's heart skipped. "You do?" "Of course," Shiala said. "You are a good man with a kind heart. Why would we not feel drawn to you?" "But I'm not one of your people," Thomas said. "I'm white. I'm an outsider." "Love does not see the color of skin," Ayana said. "It sees the color of the soul, and your soul is beautiful." The word love hung in the air between them. Thomas had never heard anyone use that word to describe feelings between a man and woman, except in the context of marriage and duty. But this felt different. This felt like something pure and natural and right. "I've never—" Thomas started, then felt his face get warm. "I've never been with anyone. A woman, I mean. My father said such things were only for marriage and only then for making children." Shiala reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm and gentle. "Your father taught you many things that were meant to keep you small and afraid," she said. "But love is meant to make you grow, to make you more than you were before. We would like to show you a different way," Ayana said. "If you want to learn." Thomas looked from one sister to the other. In the firelight, they looked like spirits themselves, beautiful and otherworldly. His whole body was trembling with nervous energy. "I want to learn," he whispered. What happened next was like nothing Thomas had ever imagined. The sisters approached him with such tenderness and patience that all his fear melted away. They touched him gently, showed him that his body was not something to be ashamed of, but something to be celebrated. There was no rush, no urgency. They took time to help him understand what he was feeling, to let him explore the new sensations without fear or guilt. When Shiala kissed him, it was soft and sweet, like drinking water when you are very thirsty. "You are trembling," Ayana said, placing her hand on his chest. "Are you afraid?" "A little," Thomas admitted. "But not the bad kind of afraid. The kind you feel when something wonderful is about to happen." "That is exactly right," she said, smiling. As the night progressed, Thomas discovered that love could be many things at once. It could be gentle and fierce, playful and serious, physical and spiritual. The sisters shared themselves with him completely, holding nothing back, and in return, he opened his heart to them in ways he had never thought possible. There were moments when he was with Shiala while Ayana watched with loving eyes. There were moments when Ayana held him while Shiala whispered encouragement. And there were moments when all three of them were connected in a circle of warmth and love that seemed to fill the entire canyon. Thomas learned that his body was capable of feelings he had never imagined, but more than that, he learned that his heart was capable of holding love for more than one person at the same time. This too had been forbidden by his father's teachings, but it felt completely natural and right. "Is this wrong?" he asked at one point when they were all lying together by the fire. "How can love be wrong?" Ayana asked. "Love is the force that connects all living things. It is the most sacred thing in the world. But my father says—" "Your father is not here," Ciala said gently, "and his rules are not Apache rules. Tonight, you are learning our way." As dawn approached, they lay together talking softly about what they had shared. Thomas felt completely changed, not just in his body but in his understanding of what it meant to be human. "I never knew it could be like this," he said. I thought it would be shameful and dirty." "Only shame makes it dirty," Ayana said. "When it comes from love and respect, it is the most beautiful thing people can share." "Will you remember this night?" Ciala asked, tracing patterns on his chest with her finger. "I'll remember it for the rest of my life," Thomas said. "But what happens now? I can't stay here forever." The sisters exchanged a look that Thomas was beginning to recognize. They were communicating without words, the way people who love each other deeply can do. "What happens now is up to you," Ayana said. "You can go back to your old life and pretend this never happened. Or you can take what you have learned and use it to become the man you were meant to be." "But I'll never see you again," Thomas said, and the thought made his chest ache. "You will carry us with you always," Ciala said. "In your heart, in your memories, in the way you treat other people. That is how love works. It changes you forever." Thomas understood that they were right. Even if he never saw these women again, he would never be the same person who had stumbled into their canyon 3 days ago. They had given him something precious, not just their bodies, but their wisdom, their acceptance, their love. As the sun rose over the canyon walls, painting everything in shades of gold and pink, Thomas felt like he was seeing the world with new eyes. Everything looked more beautiful, more alive, more full of possibilities. "Thank you," he said, knowing the words were not enough but saying them anyway. "Thank you for letting us love you," Ayana replied. "You have given us a gift as well." Thomas did not understand what gift he could have given these amazing women, but he could see in their eyes that they meant it. Somehow, by allowing himself to be vulnerable and open with them, he had given them something valuable too. As they prepared breakfast together in the morning light, Thomas knew that his time in the canyon was coming to an end. But he also knew that this night had changed the course of his entire life. He could never go back to being the fearful, narrow-minded person he had been before. The question was, what kind of person would he choose to become? The morning sun filled the canyon with warm light, but Thomas felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. As beautiful as the night had been, the dawn brought reality crashing back. He would have to leave this magical place and return to his father's world. Ayana and Ciala seemed to sense his troubled mood as they shared breakfast together. The easy conversation of the past few days was replaced by a heavy silence. "You are thinking about going home," Ayana said finally. Thomas nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I have to. My father will be worried. He might even send people looking for me." "And you are afraid of what he will say about us," Ciala added gently. "I'm afraid of what I'll say to him," Thomas admitted. "How can I go back and pretend nothing has changed? How can I live the same way I did before, knowing what I know now?" Ayana reached across and took his hand. "You cannot live the same way, and you should not try to. What you learned here is part of you now. But if I tell my father about you, about what happened—" Thomas shook his head. "He would never understand. He would say I've been corrupted. He might even—" He could not finish the sentence, but they all knew what he meant. His father might disown him completely. "Then perhaps you should not tell him everything," Ciala suggested. "Perhaps you should show him instead of telling him." "What do you mean?" "Live differently," Ayana explained. "Treat people with more kindness. Question the things you have been taught. Make your own choices about what is right and wrong. He will see the change in you even if he does not understand the cause." Thomas thought about this. It sounded wise, but also very difficult. What if I'm not strong enough? What if I go back and just fall into the old patterns? You are stronger than you think, Ciala said. The man who stumbled into our canyon 3 days ago was already questioning things. Otherwise, you would not have been able to learn what you learned here. They finished eating in thoughtful silence. Thomas knew he was delaying the inevitable, but he was not ready to leave. Every minute here felt precious. Finally, Ayana stood up. There is something we need to tell you, she said. Something important about why you cannot stay here. Thomas felt his heart sink. He had not dared to hope that he could stay, but hearing it said out loud made it real. Our father is the chief of our band, Ayana continued. He makes decisions for all our people. One of those decisions is that no white man can live among us as family. Why? Thomas asked, though he thought he knew the answer. Because white men have broken too many promises, Ciala said sadly. They have taken too much of our land, hurt too many of our people. Our father has seen what happens when we trust outsiders. But I'm not like them, Thomas protested. We know that, Ayana said. But our father does not know you. And even if he did, the rule exists for the safety of all our people. One exception could lead to problems with the government, with other tribes, with our own people who have lost family to white violence. Thomas understood, but it still hurt. So even if I wanted to stay, even if I was willing to give up my old life completely, it would not be possible, Ayana said gently. We are sorry. If things were different, we would welcome you as a brother, Ciala finished. The weight of this reality settled on Thomas like a heavy blanket. He had found something precious here: love, acceptance, a new understanding of himself and the world. But he could not keep it. He would have to carry it with him back to a place where it might slowly fade away. What about you two? He asked. Could you ever leave here, come with me? The sisters looked at each other with sad eyes. Our people need us, Ayana said. I am their healer. Ciala helps teach the children. We have responsibilities we cannot abandon. And we would not be welcome in your world either, Ciala added. You know this is true. Thomas did know it was true. His father would never accept Apache women in their home. The townspeople would treat them badly. They might even be in danger. So this is goodbye, Thomas said, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. Not goodbye, Ayana corrected. This is the beginning of a new life for you. We will always be part of that life, even if we are not physically present. Ciala went to a clay pot and took out something wrapped in soft leather. She brought it to Thomas and placed it in his hands. This is for you, she said, to remember us by. Thomas unwrapped the leather and found a beautiful turquoise stone, smooth and blue-green like the sky at sunset. It was carved with intricate patterns and hung on a leather cord. This stone has been blessed by our elders, Ayana explained. It will protect you and remind you of the truth you learned here. I can't take this, Thomas said. It must be valuable. It is very valuable, Ciala agreed. That is why we want you to have it. Its value is not in money, but in spirit. It will help keep your new understanding alive when the old world tries to make you forget. Thomas lifted the cord and put it around his neck. The stone felt warm against his chest, as if it held some of the fire from their sacred canyon. Thank you, he said. I'll treasure it always. And we want you to learn our real names, Ayana said. The names we use with white people are not our true names. We want to give you our Apache names, the ones our mothers gave us. She spoke a word in Apache that sounded like music. Then Ciala spoke her true name as well. The sounds were beautiful and complex, unlike anything in English. Practice saying them, Ciala said, so you do not forget. Thomas tried to repeat the names, stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds. The sisters patiently corrected him until he could say them properly. When you say our true names, we will hear you in our hearts, Ayana said. No matter how far apart we are. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Thomas knew he could not delay any longer. His horse was saddled and waiting. His shoulder was healed enough for travel. There was no reason to stay except his desire to hold on to this perfect time a little longer. "Will I ever see you again?" he asked as they walked to where Bella waited. "That is in the hands of the spirits," Ayana said. "But whether we meet again, in this life or not, you will carry us with you, and we will carry you with us." Thomas mounted his horse slowly, every movement feeling final. From the saddle he looked down at the two women who had changed his life forever. "I love you both," he said. "I need you to know that." "We love you too," Ciala said, tears shining in her eyes. "More than you know." "Remember what you learned here," Ayana added. "Use it to make the world a better place." Thomas touched the turquoise stone at his chest and nodded. He turned Bella toward the canyon entrance, but before he could ride away, Ciala called out to him. "Thomas, what will you do now, with your life, I mean?" Thomas thought for a moment. "I don't know exactly," he said. "But it won't be the same as before, I promise you that." "Good," she said, smiling through her tears. "That is all we ask." As Thomas rode out of the canyon, he did not look back. He was afraid that if he did, he would turn around and never leave. Instead, he focused on the path ahead and on the warm weight of the sacred stone against his heart. He had entered this canyon as one person and was leaving as someone completely different. The question now was whether he would have the courage to live as this new person in a world that would not understand or accept the change. But one thing was certain. He could never go back to being the fearful, narrow-minded man he had been before. Ayana and Ciala had awakened something in him that could never be put back to sleep. The real test of his transformation was just beginning. Thomas rode slowly across the desert, his mind churning with everything that had happened. The turquoise stone bounced gently against his chest with each step Bella took. Every few minutes he found himself touching it, making sure it was real, and not just part of an amazing dream. The sun was getting hot, but Thomas barely noticed. He was too busy trying to figure out how to live with what he had learned. How could he go back to his father's ranch and pretend nothing had changed? How could he sit through his father's harsh sermons about sinful desires when he now knew that love could be sacred and beautiful? As he rode, Thomas began to make plans. He could not tell his father about Ayana and Ciala directly. His father would never understand. But maybe he could start small. Maybe he could question some of his father's beliefs little by little. Maybe he could show more kindness to the Mexican workers on the ranch, who his father always treated badly. The more Thomas thought about it, the more he realized how much needed to change. His father's ranch was run like a military camp, with harsh rules and no room for gentleness or joy. The workers were treated like property rather than people. The land was used roughly, with no thought for protecting it for future generations. Thomas had never questioned any of this before. He had thought it was just the way things had to be. But now he saw other possibilities. He had seen how Ayana and Ciala lived in harmony with their environment, taking only what they needed and giving back more than they took. By afternoon, Thomas could see familiar landmarks. He was getting close to his father's ranch. His stomach tightened with nervousness. What would he say when his father asked where he had been? How much of the truth could he tell? As he rode into the ranch yard, his father came running out of the house. Samuel McKenna was a tall, stern man with gray hair and hard eyes. He looked both relieved and angry to see his son. "Thomas, where the hell have you been? I've been worried sick for 3 days." "I got caught in that storm," Thomas said, dismounting from Bella. "Had to take shelter and wait it out." "Where?" "There's nothing out there but empty land." Thomas had prepared for this question. "I found a cave and some rocks, waited until the storm passed and my shoulder healed up some." His father noticed the way Thomas favored his left arm. "You hurt your shoulder?" "Bella threw me when the lightning spooked her." "It's getting better now." Samuel McKenna looked his son up and down suspiciously. Something was different about Thomas, though he could not put his finger on what it was. The boy seemed calmer somehow, more confident. "Well, you're back now," his father said. "That's what matters. We've got work to do. Those cattle still need to be rounded up." Yes, sir, Thomas said. But even as he agreed, he was thinking about how different his priorities felt now. The cattle were important, but they were not the most important thing in life. There were people, and relationships and understanding that mattered more. Over the next few days, Thomas tried to settle back into his old routine. But everything felt wrong. His father's constant criticism, the harsh treatment of the workers, the narrow-minded conversations at dinner. It all grated on his nerves in ways it never had before. Thomas found himself speaking up more than he used to. When his father made cruel comments about the Mexican workers, Thomas suggested they might work better if they were treated with respect. When his father talked about expanding the ranch by taking more land, Thomas wondered out loud if they really needed so much space. These small challenges did not go unnoticed. Samuel McKenna began watching his son more carefully, suspicious of the changes he was seeing. "You've been acting strange since you got back," his father said one evening over dinner, questioning everything, going soft on the workers. "What's gotten into you?" Thomas touched the turquoise stone hidden under his shirt. "I've just been thinking about things differently, I guess." "Well, stop it," his father snapped. "Thinking. Too much leads to trouble. We've got a good life here, don't go messing it up with fancy ideas." But Thomas could not stop thinking. Every day he remembered more clearly the lessons Ayana and Siyala had taught him. He remembered their gentleness, their wisdom, their different way of seeing the world. And every day he became more convinced that he could not live his old life anymore. The breaking point came 2 weeks after his return. Thomas was in town getting supplies when he overheard a group of men talking about the Indian problem. They were discussing ways to drive the remaining Apache bands off their land so that white settlers could claim it. "The only good Indian is a dead Indian," one man said, and the others laughed and agreed. Before he knew what he was doing, Thomas stepped forward. "That's not true," he said. The men turned to look at him in surprise. Thomas recognized most of them. They were ranchers and businessmen from the area. "Excuse me, boy," said the man who had made the comment. "I said that's not true," Thomas repeated, his heart pounding. "Apache people are human beings just like us. They deserve to be treated with respect." The men stared at him in shock. Then they began to laugh. "Since when did Samuel McKenna's boy become an Indian lover?" one of them asked. "Since I learned something about them," Thomas said, standing his ground despite his fear. "They're not savages. They're intelligent, peaceful people who just want to live their lives." "Peaceful?" another man scoffed. "Tell that to the folks they've scalped. And tell that to the Apache children who've been killed by white soldiers," Thomas shot back. "Violence goes both ways. Maybe if we tried to understand each other instead of fighting." The men were no longer laughing. They looked angry and disturbed by Thomas's words. "Boy, you better watch what you're saying," the first man warned. "Talk like that could get you in serious trouble around here." Thomas felt the turquoise stone warm against his chest, and he heard Siyala's voice in his memory. "Live differently. Show them instead of telling them." "I'm not trying to cause trouble," Thomas said more calmly. "I just think we should judge people as individuals, not as groups." He bought his supplies and left quickly, but he knew word of what he had said would spread. In a small community like theirs, news traveled fast. Sure enough, when Thomas got home, his father was waiting for him with a furious expression. "What's this I hear about you defending Indians in town?" Samuel McKenna demanded. Thomas set down the supplies and faced his father. "I was just saying we should treat all people fairly." "All people? Indians aren't people, Thomas. They're obstacles to progress. They're standing in the way of civilization." "No, they're not," Thomas said, surprising himself with his firmness. "They have their own civilization, different from ours, but just as valid." His father's face turned red with anger. "What has gotten into you? It's like you've been bewitched or something." The word bewitched made Thomas think of the magic he had experienced in the canyon. But it had not been evil magic. It had been the magic of love and understanding and acceptance. "Maybe I have been bewitched," Thomas said quietly. By the truth. That night. Thomas lay in his bed staring at the ceiling. He knew he could not keep living this double life. Every day, the gap between who he was becoming and where he was living grew wider. Something had to change. He thought about Ayanna and Ciala, alone in their canyon. He wondered if they were thinking about him too. He whispered their true Apache names into the darkness, hoping they would hear him in their hearts as they had promised. Thomas knew what he had to do. He could not stay here and slowly become his old self again. He had to find a way to live according to what he had learned, even if it meant giving up everything familiar. The next morning, Thomas made his decision. He would leave his father's ranch. He would find some way to make a living that did not require him to compromise his new beliefs. It would be difficult and scary, but it was the only way to honor what Ayanna and Ciala had given him. As he packed his few belongings, Thomas touched the turquoise stone one more time. He was keeping his promise to the sisters. He was choosing to become the man they had helped him discover he could be. The real journey of his transformation was just beginning. 6 months had passed since Thomas McKenna left his father's ranch with nothing but his horse, his clothes, and the turquoise stone around his neck. Those months had been the hardest and most rewarding of his life. At first, he had struggled to find work. Word had spread about his defense of Apache people, and many ranchers would not hire him. He was labeled as an Indian sympathizer, which made him unwelcome in most places, but Thomas refused to give up or change his beliefs. He found work with a small rancher named Miguel Santos, a Mexican-American man who had also faced prejudice from the white community. Santos appreciated Thomas's willingness to treat all workers fairly, regardless of their background. Working for Santos taught Thomas even more about different ways of living. The Santos family ran their ranch differently than Thomas's father had. They worked with the land instead of fighting against it. They treated their animals with respect. They shared their profits fairly with the workers. Thomas threw himself into learning these new methods. He studied how to rotate grazing areas to keep the grass healthy. He learned to read the weather patterns and work with natural cycles instead of against them. Most importantly, he learned to see the ranch as part of a larger community that included people, animals, plants, and the land itself. The changes in Thomas were visible to everyone who met him. He was calmer, more thoughtful, more confident in his own judgment. He no longer looked to others to tell him what was right and wrong. He made those decisions for himself, guided by the principles Ayanna and Ciala had taught him. But the biggest change came when Thomas heard about tensions between local Apache bands and the territorial government. A new Indian agent had been appointed, and he was pushing policies that would force all Apache people onto a distant reservation, far from their traditional lands. Thomas knew he had to act. This was his chance to honor the promise he had made, to himself and to the sisters who had changed his life. He began attending town meetings where these policies were discussed. At first, people were hostile to his presence, but Thomas had learned patience from his time with Ayanna and Ciala. He spoke calmly and presented facts instead of emotions. He talked about the Apache people's deep knowledge of the land and how that knowledge could benefit everyone. He pointed out that forcing them onto distant reservations would waste that valuable understanding. He suggested that cooperation might work better than conflict. Slowly, some people began to listen. A few local businessmen realized that peaceful trade with Apache bands could be more profitable than constant warfare. Some ranchers admitted they could learn from Apache methods of living sustainably in the desert. Thomas's breakthrough came when he was asked to serve as a translator and mediator in negotiations between the territorial government and several Apache chiefs. His unique position, a white man who understood and respected Apache culture, made him valuable to both sides. The negotiations were difficult and tense. There were moments when Thomas thought they would fail completely. Old prejudices and past injuries made trust nearly impossible. But Thomas remembered everything Ayanna and Ciala had taught him about patience, understanding, and seeing the humanity in everyone. He worked tirelessly to find common ground between the two sides. The turning point came when Thomas suggested bringing in Apache women as advisors on matters affecting families and children. This was almost unheard of in white culture. But Thomas knew from his experience with the sisters that Apache women were often the real decision-makers in their communities. When the Apache negotiators saw that Thomas understood and respected their culture enough to suggest this, their attitude toward him changed completely. They began to trust him as a true mediator rather than just another white official. The final agreement was not perfect, but it was far better than what the government had originally proposed. Instead of being forced onto a distant reservation, the Apache bands would be allowed to remain in their traditional territory in exchange for peace agreements and limited cooperation with white settlers. As the negotiations concluded, Thomas found himself face to face with a familiar figure. An older Apache man approached him, his weathered face serious but not unfriendly. "You are the white man who lived with my daughters," the man said in careful English. Thomas's heart stopped. This was Ayanna and Siala's father, the chief his daughters had told him about. The man who had forbidden relationships between Apache women and white men. "Yes, sir," Thomas said respectfully. "I am." The chief studied Thomas's face for a long moment. "They told me about you, how you learned, how you changed." Thomas touched the turquoise stone beneath his shirt. "Your daughters saved my life in more ways than one. I can see this," the chief said. "You speak for my people when others will not listen. You work for peace when others choose war. This is good." The chief reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out something wrapped in soft deerskin. He handed it to Thomas. "From my daughters," he said simply. Thomas unwrapped the gift with trembling hands. Inside was a second turquoise stone, different from the first but equally beautiful. This one was carved with symbols that looked like the ancient paintings he had seen on the canyon walls. "They want you to know they are proud of what you have become," the chief continued, "and they want you to know that the door to our family is no longer closed to you." Thomas looked up in shock. "You mean?" "I mean that a man who proves himself through actions, not just words, can earn the right to be part of our people. If that is what he truly wants." Thomas's mind raced. Was the chief offering him what he had thought was impossible? A chance to be with Ayanna and Siala again? A chance to live among the Apache people as family? "I would be honored beyond words," Thomas said. "But I want to make sure I understand. You're saying I could—" "I am saying that you have proven yourself worthy of consideration," the chief corrected. "The final decision belongs to my daughters. They are free women who make their own choices about matters of the heart." The chief turned to leave, then paused. "There will be a gathering at the full moon 3 days from now, at the place where the two rivers meet. If you wish to speak with my daughters about your future, you will find them there." Thomas watched the chief walk away, his heart pounding with hope and excitement. Could it really be possible? Could he have a future with the two women who had awakened his true self? 3 days later, as the full moon rose over the desert, Thomas rode to the place where the two rivers met. He found a large gathering of Apache people celebrating some kind of ceremony. Fires burned bright against the darkness, and he could hear singing and drumming echoing across the water. At first he hung back, uncertain whether he should intrude, but then he saw them, Ayanna and Siala, standing by one of the fires looking even more beautiful than he remembered. Siala saw him first. She said something to her sister, and they both turned toward him. Even from a distance, Thomas could see the joy in their eyes. He dismounted and walked toward them, his hands shaking with nervous excitement. When he was close enough to speak, he stopped and looked at both sisters. "I kept my promise," he said simply. "We know," Ayanna said, smiling. "We have heard about everything you have done. You have become the man we always knew you could be. But more than that," Siala added, "you have become yourself, the real Thomas, not the one your father tried to create." Thomas pulled out the second turquoise stone their father had given him. "Your father said the decision was yours to make." The sisters looked at each other with that same wordless communication he remembered so well. Then they looked back at him. What decision would you like us to make? Ayanna asked. Thomas took a deep breath. This was the moment that would determine the rest of his life. I want to ask if you would accept me as part of your family, he said. Not as a visitor or an outsider, but as someone who belongs with you. I want to learn your ways completely. I want to live according to the wisdom you showed me. I want to spend my life loving you both and serving your people. The sisters smiled at each other, then at him. We have been hoping you would ask that question for 6 months, Ciala said. Our answer is yes, Ayanna added. Yes to all of it. As Thomas took them both in his arms, he felt the turquoise stones warm against his chest. The scared, narrow-minded young man who had stumbled into their canyon was gone forever. In his place stood someone who had learned the true meaning of love, courage, and transformation. The night that had changed him forever had led to this moment, a new life built on understanding, respect, and the kind of love that sees no boundaries between people who are willing to open their hearts to each other. Thomas had found his true home at last, not in a place, but in the hearts of the people who had seen his potential and loved him into becoming his best self. And as the three of them danced together under the full moon, surrounded by a community that had accepted him as family, Thomas knew that sometimes the most important journeys begin with getting lost in a storm.